Let's face it, if you're a weekend gardener, there is nothing more rewarding or tasty than growing one of those ginormous tomatoes.
Yes, exactly. And since a lot of you have already started planting tomatoes this spring, we sought out the advice of Georgia gardening guru Walter Reeves to help you get the best results possible.
This is a tomato sandwich, and this is a tomato plant. So what does it take to go between plant and sandwich so you can have something to eat from your garden? Well, tomatoes are really easy to grow. You can grow them in containers, of course, but in a garden, we're going to talk about how to do it properly, how to plant a tomato in the garden. Now, the first thing to do for any plant, of course, is to know whether or not the soil is good for growing that particular plant. And this soil at Mr. Cason's vegetable garden at Callaway Gardens is pretty awesome. They've been gardening here for 40 years at Mr. Cason's vegetable garden, and this is a nice sandy loam, so I don't need to add anything to it. I don't need to add sand, don't need to add any organic matter, because it can be loosened up. Heck, I could do it with my fingers if I needed to. So I'll loosen an area, a couple of feet wide, 16 inches is just fine, and then scoop out a thing in the middle to plant our tomato. Now, one of the interesting things about tomato plants is that they can grow roots alongside the stem. So actually you can plant this tomato a little deeper than it grows in the pot, and that will allow more roots, and with more roots you have more tomatoes, and that's what you want, right? So I'm going to dig out a big scoop down the middle here, and we'll plant our tomato down at the bottom. Okay, we'll pull it out of its pot. Come on. Put it way down here. Since that lower leaf is liable to be covered in soil, I'm going to take it off, and we'll put the soil around it. Now, before you plant a tomato, there are some decisions that have to be made of what kind of tomato you want. Some people just go for the biggest tomato that the garden center has, and your local garden center, of course, will have a big selection. But a couple of things you need to think about is whether or not the tomato is determinate or indeterminate. This is a big boy tomato, and it is indeterminate. Now, what does that mean, indeterminate? It simply means that it will continue to grow and flower and have fruit from the time you plant it in the ground up until the first frost of fall. So indeterminate plants will give you a harvest all summer long. On the other hand, this celebrity tomato right here is determinate, and what that means is it will have all of its tomatoes pretty much ripen at one time. So if you like to can tomatoes or freeze tomatoes, you want a lot of them at one time to work with, then a determinate tomato is good for you. And notice something else about the label on this particular tomato. It says what, VFNTAST. It means that it's resistant to verticillium wilt, fusarium wilt, tobacco mosaic virus, spotted wilt virus, and lots of other things. So it's a more disease-resistant tomato after all than the big boy is. I've chosen the big boy though. I want a big tomato for my sandwich. So once we've planted the tomato, planted a little deeply right there, let's give it some fertilizer. I like to use the slow-release, time-release granular fertilizers because, quite frankly, sometimes I can't remember when was the last time I fertilized a tomato. The label says I can use, let's see, 8 tablespoons. So let's scatter a bunch of fertilizer out here. The roots of a tomato plant will go out about 14 to 16 inches around the plant. And so I want to make sure I have a lot of fertilizer there. And I'll mix it up a little bit. But here's one more thing that can happen to your tomato. It's called blossom end rot. It's when you have this big, juicy red tomato on your plant, and you go to harvest it, and the bottom is all rotten and black and just nasty looking. It's the blossom end. It's rotten, and so they call the disease blossom end rot. It's caused by a lack of calcium in the plant when the baby tomatoes are about the size of a marble, just very small tomatoes. And so how can you add calcium to the plant? This is an easy way. Get some gypsum wall board. Now every hardware store is going to have a little stack of gypsum you can use to put walls in their house. And what I'm going to do is use my pruner to scatter some of this powder on the ground. Maybe it'd be better if I scraped it like this. That's the way to do it. And gypsum is nothing but calcium sulfate. And so this calcium sulfate will dissolve in the soil and give lots of calcium to my plant so that it doesn't have blossom end rot. I don't want to add lime to the soil because if you add a lot of lime, it'll cause the tomato to turn yellow because the pH is too high. So I'll mix that in with the soil as well. Now let's water it. Everybody knows you have to water it initially, and during the summertime, sometimes you have to water it every day. A big plant can take up a couple of quarts of water during every day. So we want to be sure it doesn't dry out. And also, to make sure that it doesn't dry out, we can use mulch. Now you can use all sorts of things for mulch. I know people that use newspaper for mulch, but I'm going to use bark chips here. One of the things about mulching that you don't think about it being a way to prevent diseases, but after all, there are a lot of fungi and bacteria, things like that in the ground. And if they splash up onto the leaves of your plant, sometimes they can cause a disease called early blight. And so I try to mulch my tomatoes immediately so the soil on the ground doesn't splash up on it during irrigation or during rain or something like that. So now we have our plant, it's in the ground. All we have to do now is water a few times, wait, in a couple of months we're going to have great big tomatoes on it, and I'm going to have a tomato sandwich. So you can look forward to a lot more clips just like this of how to garden and take care of your landscape at the Georgia Farm Monitor.